And under President and CEO David Gunn, Amtrak has overhauled its financial accounting system and trimmed its workforce by 20%, while adding 20% more trains. Last year, Amtrak achieved record ridership of 25 million riders nationwide. I remind you, the equivalent of 125,000 fully booked 757 airplanes.
In the early 1980s, Amtrak began to experience quite a turnaround as the new equipment came online. They bought new locomotives, they bought new cars, they improved service all across the country. And ridership increased, much to the surprise of many in the administrations. Passenger trains can work in the United States. California has more passenger trains now than they did 40 years ago. There's a station in California, Martinez, that had no trains going through there 20 years ago. Today, about 40 trains pass through there.
Well, Amtrak, America's passenger railroad, is a tremendously important asset. Its ridership right now, over 25 million a year, has been growing for several years.
Ridership is already growing. Sometimes it's very difficult to get a seat, but you really have to start changing the way you live and start demonstrating that trains are important to you. And the best way to do that is by riding the train.
Other corridors have thrived. Milwaukee to Chicago, of course, Northeast Corridor, plus below the corridor from DC down to Richmond. It shows that if you put some money into it, you run frequent service, convenient service, good service, the public will ride the trains.
The state of Washington is another state where, in the absence of any meaningful federal partnership, they have accomplished a fair amount. Now, most of what they plan to do is further out into the future with federal funding, but they have accomplished a significant increase in ridership. They've brought in these beautiful Spanish Talgo trains, which the public loves. They don't go that much faster than the trains they replaced, but they have that feeling of modernity that attracts a lot of people that the old Amfleet trains just don't get. It's sort of like Acela Express in the Northeast, where the main thing is not that the trains are a few minutes faster than the Metroliners. The main thing is that those trains look and feel like 21st century trains, and there are some folks that will fly if you don't give me those 21st century trains.
Providing another transportation choice isn't just a matter of convenience. I see it as a matter of national security to ensure that we don't depend entirely on one mode of travel if problems strikes.
A big boost in terms of public credibility, I think, from two events in recent years. The first was 9/11. Most dramatically, the congressman from the district where the World Trade Center exists, Representative Nadler, was only able to get back to his district that day because Amtrak was still running, and Amtrak was the only thing that was running. That's made a big impression on people, both specifically to get into Manhattan, but more generally the concept that it's actually possible that the air system could be shut down, and if that happens again, if we have no Amtrak, then the options for people are severely limited.
We founded Reconnecting America back in 2001 after the horrible terrorist attacks on September 11th, when we saw the difference that it made in this country of having an integrated transportation system, not just being reliant on aviation, but also having a rail system. Here on the East Coast, it made a tremendous difference, both the transit system that was critical to evacuating Washington after the attacks on the Pentagon to get people out of the city, as well as continuing movement on the East Coast when aviation was shut down the days following those attacks.
I was here in Washington, D.C. when we had the horrific events of September 11th. If it weren't for Amtrak, when the nation's air travel was grounded, it would have been one traffic jam from Arlington, Virginia to New Haven, Connecticut.
Railroads are a dependable transportation source. In the aftermath of September 11th, the railroads really came to the rescue of New York City. People who couldn't fly were able to take trains. The railroads kept running shortly after the police had secured Ground Zero. And in the case of Katrina, once again, the railroads have been a source to get people in and out of New Orleans in a relatively quick way. They have come right back into New Orleans in an expedient manner.
Also, the fallout from 9/11 is that short distance travel by air has become much less attractive. Not primarily because people are afraid of flying, but primarily because the time and the security measures that the time consumes make the time competitiveness less attractive for air, and that's led to a big increase in shorter distance train travel.
Prior to September 11th, airline trips, about 56% of all airline trips were for flights under 500 miles. After September 11th, that number dipped down to about 47% of trips because people were afraid to fly. The security was extremely tight. Many smaller airports were still shut down, and so it's not surprising that number dipped down. In recent months, it's been edging back up, and we're now again about 56–57% of all flights are under 500 miles or less. We're hearing that the airport traffic is back. In some cases, that's true in some airports around the country. In other airports, they still haven't quite rebounded, in part because of changes that have happened to the airline industry. You've had some major long-distance carriers that have gone bankrupt and have pulled out of their hubs, like in Pittsburgh and St. Louis and other places.
It's no secret. We sit here today at a crossroads for Amtrak and the future of passenger rail service in this country. We all know that the Amtrak Board of Directors unilaterally decided to fire Mr. Gunn, claiming he was not committed to reform, which I find to be an unbelievable statement. No one has pushed reform more than David Gunn. I know it. I've called him for things in New York that he said I just can't do.
Mr. Gunn was fired because, frankly, he was seceding. And if I was going to give a grade as a former college professor, I would give Mr. Gunn an A. And if I was going to give an F, just like the American people, I would give an F to the board and to the Bush administration. You get an F.
Mr. Gunn had a vision to move America in that direction, to begin to catch up with third world countries or developing countries, India and others with national rail systems. No, no one could ever imagine we'll ever get up with Europe there. We couldn't compete with them, I guess.
Until that sense of public policy changes to view intercity passenger train service for what it is, which is an important, we feel, an important function of the total transportation mix.
We need better trains, and we need better trains because my community is suffering because we can't get to wherever it is when we need to get there. And we need to think about the day that we're going to start building high-speed rail, and I wish that we were doing it right now because of our problems with oil and our problems with congestion and all of the other things, the deaths on the highways. We should be doing it right now, but we don't have to start with it right away. We just start with little things that make a huge difference, like the Englewood flyover, Brighton Park flyover, switches in Pittsburgh so that you get into the Pittsburgh train station faster, slight upgrades to main lines between in the mountains, and better equipment that can go faster on existing track speeds.
When you fiddle with the Amtrak system and start talking about taking off long-distance passenger trains, it is truly affecting the individual mobility of a great many of our citizens. People literally cannot get out of town. So it's easy to take pot shots at long-distance trains, and the fact is, when you run one train over a route, sometimes only 3 days a week, usually daily, that train has to cover the overhead costs of that entire route. The only way to get it done right is not to look at how we're going to cut costs on that one train that operates 3 days a week or maybe 7 days a week, but how to get a second and third train over that route so that passengers in medium-sized cities, or anywhere in Ohio for that matter, don't have to get on a train at 3 in the morning because it's the only time the train runs through town.
This year, Americans, we have invested for generations billions of dollars to create what used to be a world-class transportation system and what can and should continue to be a world-class transportation system. But it's not going to happen.